Hello, and welcome back to the Basement Files, here from my cellar. Today, we're celebrating the world's second best holiday, Friday the 13th. And I figured what better way to do that than, not ranking the Friday the 13th films, but ranking Jason's masks in the Friday the 13th films. For obvious reasons, we're going over 11 films in total, excluding the first one. As much as I love it, it's an absolute classic and a juggernaut of horror. Jason's not in it, and when he is, he doesn't have a mask. Number 11 on the list, being the weakest in my opinion, is Friday the 13th Part 5, A New Beginning. First and foremost, it's not even Jason behind the mask, so that's a tick off the quality right there. And second of all, while it keeps the cheek designs, as you see here, it has them in blue, and if you ask me, it doesn't really complement the white as great as the red does. Number 10 is Jason X, and as much as I love the campiness of this movie, I recommend it to everybody. I plan on watching it this Friday the 13th. It's not even quite a hockey mask. It's more of a futuristic amalgamation of a hockey mask and a skull that shows too much of the top of his head and comes together too much at the front, which makes it more seem like an astronaut suit than anything. Makes sense, they're in space, but it's not really Jason Voorhees to me. And anyway, the mask is a bit too expressive for my tastes. I'm more of the company that believes that the killer's mask should be a flat expression. That way the viewer or the victim can decide on what they think the killer is thinking. Number 9 on my list is Friday the 13th Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan. And for all of the problems that the film had off camera and on camera, the mask goes with a classic foundational design, sure, but really ditches that beat up nature that it gained from 7, which, as I'll get into later, is what I really like about some of these designs. Furthermore, after he lost his regular mask at the end of 7 in the telekinetic fight, he stole this one off of a boat bro that was sailing through the lake. I didn't even know a boat that big could fit in Camp Crystal Lake, let alone get to another port. All in all, it's a decent design. It might be a bit too brown when he comes out of the water initially, but it's not really his mask. It's a Halloween store knockoff, if anything. Number 8 on my list kind of ties back into number 10. Now I know what you're thinking. Isn't it not fair to call the Jason X mask not a hockey mask, but not have Friday the 13th Part 2 as the next one on the list? Yes, but let me explain. Number 8 on my list is Friday the 13th Part 2, the burlap sack with the one eye hole punched out. This is obviously before he gets the hockey mask in the third movie. I get what you're saying. It's the same line of thought as X. It's not a hockey mask. This one isn't even close, but I think it's a lot more menacing and honestly a lot more unique than the mask in Jason X. I mean, it's kind of like some guy just had a last-minute decision to throw something on his face, grab the first thing he could find in his old decrepit house in the woods, and there you go. That's Jason Voorhees. That's how we're introduced to him. That's not how he's remembered, but something needs to be said for the first iteration of the character. Number 7 on my list is Friday the 13th Part 6, Jason Lives. Arguably, this is the Halloween 4 of the Friday the 13th franchise, where the main character killer comes back and wreaks havoc amongst angsty teenagers. And sure, this film does usher in some really great kills in the franchise, but the mask to me is just a little basic. There's nothing wrong with it. It keeps the axe mark that I'll get to later, but all in all, it's just a regular old hockey mask. Number 6 on my list is the Friday the 13th remake in 2009. Again, this goes back to the last entry. It's just fine. There's nothing really wrong with it. There's nothing really great with it. This one is a bit more dirty than the one you find in Friday the 13th Part 6. But then again, this is also a more modernized take on the franchise. So, again, it's fine. Both of those could really be interchangeable in this list, and I would not lose any sleep over it. Number 5 on my list is Jason Goes to Hell, The Final Friday. I'm not counting other people's bodies as masks, although you could make an argument for that as Jason's soul goes in and out of various characters in the film. We are counting the actual mask that he wears in the beginning before he gets shot up by the SWAT team. The reason I like this mask so much is it's more of a zombified version of Jason Voorhees, even more so than what we see in 7. This one has the decrepit face and the degrading face of Jason almost forming around the mask, making the mask part of his own face. To me, it's very scary, probably the scariest mask we see in the entire franchise. Number 4 on my list is Freddy vs. Jason. And while we don't like Freddy on this channel, we do like Jason, specifically the mask in this movie. Freddy and Jason have many throwdowns throughout this film, but the parts that I like the best are when Jason's mask gets scratched up by Freddy's clawed hand. Towards the end of the movie, there are many shots that shows Jason's mask with new holes cut in it, scratches all along it, and just an overall dirty, beat-up mask. If anything, the dilapidated quality of this mask just shows you what kind of stuff Jason has been through since the 1980s. And while I would have loved to see Ash Williams put a chainsaw hole through that mask, the clawed glove marks will work just fine for me. Number 3, Friday the 13th, Part 4, the final chapter. Now, while a lot of people genuinely love this movie and think it's one of the best, I think the real argument comes in the fact that this is one of Jason's best looks. This is where the axe mark in the top of the head is introduced, adding a very small detail to a very noticeable look. A small detail that, as the franchise progresses, stays present in most iterations and becomes part of the look, rather than just something that happened to Jason. This is also where the wear and tear on the paint marks are introduced in the film, which really shows the lifestyle that Jason has chasing through people in the woods. It's not all sunshines and rainbows, you know. Number 2 on this list is Friday the 13th, Part 3. I just want to throw it out there. Maybe I have a little bit of a bias because I did see this movie in 3D recently and it was one of the most incredible things I've ever seen. This is where Jason finds his hockey mask. This is the iconic look. This is where it begins. I understand that in Part 2 you're introduced to the character, but in Part 3 he becomes Jason Voorhees. He earns that spot in the Mount Rushmore of horror slashers, and it's this mask that tells you that he does so. For the number 1 spot on my list, for Jason Voorhees' best look in my opinion, it is Friday the 13th, Part 7, The New Blood. When Jason gets pulled out of the lake by telekinetic powers, it's very clear that he's been down there for a little while. Not even looking at his head, his body is full of holes, maggots, you can see his rib cage, you can see bones, his clothes are fused to his body, it's absolutely disgusting. But when the camera pans up to his mask, you can see that there's an entire chunk taken out of the side where you can see his whole teeth and skull. It is horrendous, and I loved it, every second of it. If we're talking wear and tear on the Jason Voorhees mask, this is the granddaddy of them all, baby. And yeah, eventually at the end of the movie, he does lose the mask due to a telekinetic fight. As I mentioned earlier when we were talking about Friday the 13th Part 8, he has to find a new one. To me, that is a massive downgrade. If there was some way that he could have found this one again and be walking through the streets of Manhattan looking like a zombie, what else can you expect from Friday the 13th? What else can you ask for from Friday the 13th? The mask in Part 7 collects all of the beat up moments and trauma that Jason has been through or put somebody else through and collects it all into one fantastic looking piece of horror imagery. Let me know which Jason Voorhees masks are your favorite, which Friday the 13th movies are your favorite, and how you're celebrating this lovely holiday. Remember, we get 2 in 2023. This has been Andrew in the Basement Files signing off. Hopefully we get a new Friday the 13th movie within the next 25-30 years, but with the legal hell that movie's going through, you never know. Anyway, signing off, catch you guys in the next one.